Hey everybody, welcome back to Change Your Perspective, Change Your Awareness, Change Your Life. I'm Dr. Michelina, and I am here to talk to you about what it looks like to choose life. Okay, what does it look like to choose life in all the ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually, etc., etc. And so if you haven't caught the other discussions, maybe go and check them out. But what we are talking about today is one of the harder ones, and it is emotional life. What does our choosing life look like emotionally? I can tell you right away. The first step is to acknowledge that you are an emotional being. Do you know how hard that is for most people most of the time? I cannot tell you. And I've shared this before about how hard it was for me because I was so emotionally repressed for 28 years. I needed a therapist to give me a sheet with faces on it I think I could be autistic actually, but like I was autistic. And nothing wrong with autism because, like I said, I do think there's some component of me that might be neurodivergent, but we won't go into it here. We can talk about it when we talk about mentality tomorrow. But when we think about our emotional body, our emotional self, it can be really hard to admit that we are emotional creatures. Now, let me tell you how you know you are emotional. Okay. I don't care if you're male, female, or how you identify. If you are in the flesh and you are a human, you are emotional. And here's how you know. The only things that we can do when we come out of our mother's womb is laugh, cry. That's the only things we got. Okay, we can't feed ourselves, we can't talk. The only two things we got are crying and laughter. That's it. And so, the most natural thing for us to do, the most natural process, is to outlet our emotions, to express ourselves emotionally to some degree. Now, again, we have some people who are very emotionally repressed, which is to say, this often shows up as like dismissive, avoidant attachment styles, disassociation, so a disconnect from mind and body. And then we have the other side of the spectrum of people who are so emotional all the time, all they do is roller coaster up and down, which, believe it or not, I've also been, because that is the anxious attachment style. And if you're both, which somehow I was and still have remnants of, you become the fearful avoidant. And the fearful avoidant is a veritable nightmare to be. If you've never done any research on attachment styles, strongly suggest it. Okay. We do talk about it in the academy. So if you are interested in learning about it with coaches who can teach you about it, you're going to want to check the link out in bio. But when you're thinking, you can do a self-study on it too. When you're thinking about either being very dismissive, very anxious, or both, when you're me, you are emotionally dysregulated. The only way in which you can be emotionally regulated is when you are in what's called secure attachment, which means that you are able to trust, you are able to connect, you are able to feel completely safe around people. There's no dysregulation there. It's fine. Okay? And so if you are not securely attached, you're one of the other options. And if you're me, you're the worst one. So I had a lot to work through emotionally. Core wounds. If you've ever heard the term wounding, it comes from our emotional space, right? So if you have trust wounds, guilt wounds, shame wounds, abandonment wounds, those are all emotional body wounds. There's a lot you can do to check into that, right? You can go back on my YouTube and you can go to the wounds. I think it's in red and I think gold. Check out the wounds. I put like 10 of them up there. There's a lot of places that were wounded because instead of choosing when we got emotionally hurt to grow, we chose to hide, to avoid, to stagnate, right? I will tell you right now, that is what I did. Okay, that is what I did at 5, at 8, at 10, at 12, at 15. At 14, all these places where I had these really big, hard, emotional things happen to me. I won't go into too much of it, but like getting locked in the kitchen by my grandmother, which I thought was like an unfair, unjust punishment. I was 5, 6 maybe. Getting ostracized by everybody I went to school with, and they signed a petition that said, if you don't like Michelina, sign here, and they all did. Getting raped and the whole school finding out about how I lost my virginity, which was super embarrassing. Like, there were so many really wide scale hurtful things that I experienced that I had no way to deal with, and also didn't want to burden my mom with. My mom was like my only friend, and she had a lot of stuff going on, and I didn't want to burden her with it. So where do you put that as a child? If you were me, you didn't. So I shoved it all down. Now, unfortunately, it all came back up when I was 28. And there's, a whole slew of difficulty there. But I'm writing a book about it, so you guys are aware. But the emotional way in which we choose life is, dealing with it as it comes. It's like an emotional wave. You ride the wave instead of getting sucked under and drowning in it, or if you were me, never going in the pool anymore, never going in the ocean anymore. And a lot of us do that. Now, it's hard to do this, but the necessary thing is a reframe, okay? As adults, it's very hard to do as children. If our parents don't help us through it, we don't really have the ability to do it. Because emotional pain, loss, grief, guilt, shame, all of those, fear, despair, depression, anxiety, all those kind of sort of heavy emotions, we're going to feel them. So if we don't have someone to help us through it, we didn't get helped through it. Versus now, where a lot of us are reparenting ourselves as adults, or trying to show up differently to parent our kids. Here is the one reframe, the single reframe that helped me a whole heck of a lot to start really being in the emotional sort of being that I am. And by emotional being, I don't mean out of control, crying emotion. I mean acknowledging the fact that I'm human, and part of being human is to hurt and be a feeler of things, right? So here's the number one reframe. I'll give it to you here. Whoever said life wasn't supposed to hurt? And so the reframe is, just because it doesn't feel good doesn't mean that it isn't good. That's my cat. She's going to start crying again. You know the deal, guys. You know the deal. If she hops up, we let her do what she wants to do. She's a brat. Anyway, so here is the thing about reframing that is super important. It is the height of human arrogance to be shocked at when we are hurt. No one said life. In fact, the only way to grow sometimes is to experience things that are kind of painful. Loss, grief. We need to kind of normalize. That's part of the life cycle. Losing is part of the life cycle. And if you look at the seasons, if you look at spring to summer, we lose spring to get to summer. But it's okay because we know it's going to come back next year, right? Whereas we get super scared when we lose someone because we're like, well, what if they don't come back? Or what if something doesn't come better in their place? Or so we internalize. I say this a lot. The things that are adverse to us are adversities. Adversity is just the outcome of a situation opposite than what you wanted. You were expecting to get promoted, you didn't, now you've experienced an adversity. If we don't deal with it effectively, it becomes usually a trauma we internalize. And that is how trauma is formed. And then it compacts and it sits like an iceberg in your emotional system. And until we shine light on it, and until we put heat on it, until we start to realize what it is, we can't alchemize it. We can't transmute it. We can't turn that emotional ice cube to steam. It can't evaporate. And so, what the first step is to choose life emotionally is to acknowledge you have emotion. because you do. And the second is to say, okay, all the places in my life where I've been hurt, they have felt really bad. But that doesn't mean they were bad. What can I learn from those moments? Because that's what we're supposed to do from our adverse moments. We're not supposed to park at the point of our pain. We're not supposed to say, wow, this thing really sucked. I'm done now. We're supposed to say, wow, this thing really sucked. What can I learn from it? How can I move through it? How can I grow from this thing? But no, what we do, we take on victim mentality, and also to some degree, a lot of times, entitlement mentality, where we think, how could this happen to me, victim? And also, this shouldn't have happened to me, entitlement. And also, I deserve better, entitlement and victim. And if you want to hear more on that, go to my videos on mentality. I think it's purple, right? And so when you are in that hurt mode and you don't deal with it, you are choosing emotional death. And that's on hurt. Now, here's another thing about emotions that's super important to realize. Some people, myself as one of them, get so comfortable with being hurt that we take it on. And then we don't know how to experience joy or fulfillment or happiness or love. And that's a different kind of choosing emotional death. When you get so comfortable being hurt, you take on misery and you call it your personality and your disposition. And it's actually not the case. So that's another thing that happens. We get shocked that we're hurt, but then we don't want to feel the hurt, so we just start expecting the hurt, because then it's like, at least that makes sense that I'm hurt. And then we just are miserable, which also I have done, guys. I have done all of these things. And so then, not only do we have to work through, this is how we choose life emotionally, we have to work through the heavy, hard grief, loss, despair emotions, but we also need to get comfortable at experiencing the life, the love, the happiness, the light emotions, which can be really hard when you've had a lot of pain. And so another way that we choose emotional death is by never being able to feel the lightness, the happiness, the freedom of those higher frequency emotions. Every emotion has a frequency attached to it. This might be a little bit much if you can't just kind of put it on the shelf, but every emotion has a frequency attached to it. And this is why I like to compare emotion to water molecules. If you remember back in second grade science, when you learned about the 3 stages, I think there's a weird 4th stage, but 3 stages for this, 3 stages of water: ice, liquid, solid, steam, right? Ice, water vapor. The molecules don't actually stop in the ice. They just slow down. Well, the heavier emotions like fear, depression, those are very slow moving frequencies, 20 hertz. So slow they're almost not moving. Think ice cube molecules. They're still the same water molecules. They're just slowed down, and so they form a different structure. And so higher level emotions, you can Google this and look up emotional frequency chart. It will tell you it. There's a whole thing. Higher level emotions have higher frequencies. So when you look at enlightenment, empowerment, truth, love, those are 700 hertz frequencies. They move very quickly. And so that is why when you start to transmute and emotionally alchemize, choose life in your emotional body, you stop getting bothered by the things you used to get bothered by, because you ain't got no time for it. You don't care. You're on that upward momentum. You're on that upward trajectory. You're on an upward spiral. Whereas if you're depressed, one thing leads to another, you can get on a downward spiral. That's a real thing, emotionally, energetically. And so we don't understand emotion at all, because we don't want to think about emotion at all, because we don't think that we have them. But you are an emotional being. It's one of the things that sets us apart. That and our cognitive ability, that really sets us apart from almost any other life form that we've got here. And so there's a lot that goes into understanding your emotional body. I always say awareness, action, regulation, right? Emotional awareness comes first. EQ, emotional intelligence, is like the soft skill of the century. People want people to have EQ because we're lacking it. We're very much lacking it. And so emotional awareness is the first step. Then we get into emotional action. How do we take action so that we show up differently emotionally? And then eventually we can get into regulation. The regulatory process can be really, really tricky to some degree for some people. This is why, I won't actually get into all of it, but I promise you, emotional dysregulation is probably like the epidemic of our lives right now. Emotional dysregulation leads to addictions, disorders, any kind of and mental, emotional are very closely tied. We'll talk more about mental tomorrow, but almost any kind of issue can be traced back to emotional. We are emotional creatures. And so all this to say that the first steps to choosing emotional life so that you can live differently, enjoy differently, show up differently, have a life you love, desire, and want is to actually admit that, oh yeah, I do have emotions. Fact. And then we have to learn about those emotions, right? What does that emotion look like? We need language for it. I will tell you this, one of the hardest things I had to do, and I really, really, really struggled with this, was having the ability to say, I'm hurt. Man, was that hard. Because I never did. I never had the space to do that. I never had the space to allow myself to be hurt because I didn't have the choice. Because if I was hurt, that means I wouldn't get up and go do what I had to do. And so that was a really hard one for me. And I'm just telling you my own personal experience with choosing life, because part of choosing life is knowledge, it's growth, it's shedding awareness and putting light on a thing. Where there is light, there is life, right? We can't live in the darkness, and we try to put our emotions in the dark. We try to keep ourselves in the dark from our emotions, and it ends up disconnecting us, disassociating us, and having us in death energy. And so a lot of us are 30 years old physically and 5 years old emotionally, 10 years old emotionally. People call it now Peter Pan syndrome, Alice in Wonderland syndrome, right? There's a reason for that. It's our emotional body. Because emotional maturity is one of the ways in which we actually mature in age. You can be 50 and still act like a child, and nobody's going to count you as somebody they can depend on, rely on, or want anything to do with. And because we're emotionally immature, we're emotionally choosing death energy, we have a whole bunch of non-accountable, insecure, take everything personally leaders. You've seen it probably in schools, organizations, your job, the political sphere, countries. It's an epidemic. The emotional dysregulation is a legitimate epidemic in this country. Nobody knows how to deal with their emotions. And the people who are the most successful, they know how to deal with their emotions. They either turn it into art, they turn it into music, literature, they turn it into movies, or they learn how to regulate it and get secure and go into business, right? Think of that. Look around at the successful people that you've got. That's what happens. They know how to deal with their emotions. All that to say that there are a lot of ways to get into emotional growth, but it starts with the admission that you are an emotional creature, right? And you are, because you are human. If you are watching this and you are human, you are emotional. So that was a hard first step for me. But this is how we choose life, by doing the hard stuff, right? And it doesn't need to be hard. It's actually really simple, but it's not always easy, And so if you need help, if you need a coach, if you need a couple coaches, join the academy, right? Me and my colleagues are teaching classes there every day, live classes. Join the academy, get to the school of you so that you can become schooled on yourself, right? and held accountable in a community of people who are like-minded, who want to grow. Anybody who knows anything about professional development knows that personal development aids the professional development process. You cannot develop more professionally than you have personally. Anywhere you go, there you are. So check out the school. The link is in bio. And if you are not ready for that kind of a commitment, then just keep watching here. Check out my TikTok. It has different stuff on it. Check out podcasts if you need more free resources. So many people give out free resources, so you just have to find the person that connects with you and the topic that you're interested in learning about. All that to say, so glad you're here. I hope it's helping. We will continue talking about how to choose life in all these different realms. I am writing a book on it, and that should be out sometime next year, so always talking about it. But appreciate you. Hope this is helpful for you. If you like what you're hearing, like, comment, subscribe, tell your friends, grow the channel, and I will see you on the next video.